So, put this right up here. All right, welcome to our panel. This is Horror 301. I understand that this is the more detailed one. There are two other panels, Horror 101 and Horror 201. Just so happened that time-wise, this was the last one scheduled. So ends up being the first one of the con. So welcome everybody who is here. My name is Crystal Mazur. I am a freelance writer and game developer. I've written on games for Vampire 5th Edition. I've written on Never Going Home. I'm also the line developer for Pip System for Third Eye Games and a whole bunch of other games. And so I'm going to be the moderator for today. And I'm going to interject a little bit of things, but I want our panelists to be able to talk a little bit more with their expertise because they are all coming from very different places, and I really, really enjoy listening to them talk. So I'm going to have them introduce themselves.
Hello, hi, I'm Markia McCarty, MarkeiaMcCarty, and I come from a very diverse horror background. Started when I was 8 years old. I believe it was called, it was the Santa Claus movie where he's a serial killer. I think someone here might...
Silent Night, Deadly Night?
Silent Night, Deadly Night. Yeah, Silent Night, Deadly Night. It
What's the next trivia question?
It began with that, and let's just do the past 3 years. I was the head story editor, narrator, director, and creative producer for the Something Scary podcast, which was an animated horror show. It was weekly on YouTube. You can go to youtube.com/snarled to see it. 2.182 million subscribers by the time I decided to put the show down, and it's under new management now, so it is still going strong if you want to see that. But animated weekly horror show, and then there was an accompanying podcast with 3 additional stories. These are all fan-submitted stories from around the world that we adapted. Some were animated, and then the rest went into the podcast. So we averaged anywhere from 600,000 to about 1 million downloads a month on the podcast. You can find it everywhere, Spotify, wherever you find your podcast, you'll find it there. As far as tabletop role-playing games are concerned, again, just in the past 3 years, I'm the community director for Hunters Entertainment. Woo! And we do Outbreak Undead. So there was a campaign of Outbreak Undead is zombie apocalypse. The tagline is, your zombie survival plan will fail. And it will. It's just a matter of time, basically. So I was part of a ttrpg campaign where we did that on Twitch, 3 years. It was myself, Luis Corazzo, Michelle Wynn Bradley, Noxweiler Berf, and plethora of wonderful guest stars. People from the ttrpg community that you know have guested on this show. And yeah, I think that's plenty, but yeah, also a professional ttrpg player and GM, and I love to do every twist of horror that can possibly exist out there.
Are you?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if we're going in order. We can jump around.
That's my mind.
I'm Brian Holland. I'm known on the internet, and the author name is BW Holland. I'm the marketing director at Chaosium. We make a game called Call of Cthulhu. Got me back. We make a game called Call of Cthulhu and some other stuff, which is pretty cool. My horror origin story. My parents are a lot older. It's weird, you know. They're older than me by a lot. Like my dad is older than most people's grandparents. So growing up, it was a pretty chill environment. My parents didn't watch horror movies, but I'll remember I was probably 8 or 9. I was playing with Star Wars toys in the lounge room while my parents were watching one of these. It was like did you get these here? It was like E. Channel E is counting down the top 10 X, Y, or Z, and it was the top 10 horror movies, and I wasn't really paying attention. But they were getting closer to one, and both my parents, who as far as I'm concerned had never even told a ghost story, but looked at each other and be like, it'll be The Exorcist. And I switched on, I'm like, why do they suddenly know what this is? And unfortunately, I looked up the TV and saw about 15 seconds of Linda Blair. And then there are three times in my life I remember being so scared I can't sleep, and that was the first one of them. And it started a morbid fascination with them. So, and then the other bit was when I was 15, we were trying to cross the threshold from being a nerd into being a super nerd, and me and my friends made a decision that I was going to go into the local nerd shop and buy what at the time was the Star Wars D20 game. I saved up my allowance, and I walked in there, and I looked at this other thing, and the clerk there said a few words that changed my life forever. And I said, "What's that?" He said, "That's the vampire game." And I showed up at Nerd Night, where they were all like, everyone's sitting there in Jedi robes and like, we're doing this. So yeah, a few years ago, I started working with Paradox. I did a little bit of work on V5. Now I'm at full-time at Chaosium. Mostly doing marketing stuff, doing a little bit of creative stuff. My first Cthulhu book actually comes out in Halloween this year, so
yeah,
it'll be fun. I hope you all buy it.
Good timing.
Yeah, that's me. Otherwise, I'm very excited to be here. Thank you for putting it together, Crystal.
Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, I'm Noxweiler Berf. I'm the creative director for Hunters Entertainment, and my horror origin is a little muddled, so I'm not going to sit here and take an hour and a half to tell it, but I will give you the brief summary. I had a weird uncle, and this isn't going where you think it is, okay? It's not as bad as it sounds. I had a weird uncle, and he was obsessed with a few things, and then, like, you know, had the big nerd energy. So it all kind of came down to ventriloquist dummies and black and white horror movies. And when I was about 6, we would stay over there. We'd visit, and like his kids were with us, and we'd all have a sleepover downstairs in the basement, surrounded by ventriloquist dummies with a TV that was constantly playing like Bela Lugosi, Boris Karloff, which are all amazing movies. And right now, in our day and age, of course, they seem tame. But at 6, I was fascinated and horrified by it, and I got deeper and deeper into this like curiosity about what it was, and I started to build haunted houses in my garage, and they were all duct tape and cardboard and whatever I could get my hands on. I ruined so many things in my house, and you know, I would bring my friends through and try to scare them, and it got worse because I was then, as a latchkey kid, kind of given over to my cousins to be babysat as I was like getting older and older. But the thing about that is that they loved Freddy Krueger, and Freddy Krueger was like on the TV with them all the time, and it was really inappropriate. But we learned a lot about slashers at that point, my brother and I. And while my brother went one way and went as far away from it as possible, I just got deeper and deeper into it. And I had begun role-playing at that point, but I didn't start with Dungeons & Dragons. I started with a Palladium product known as Riffs. And Riffs was a very complicated, weird game, but you could do anything you wanted. And like when I was told about what these products were, I was kind of like, yeah, that's cool, dragons and stuff, which I was obsessed with. I mean, I was a miniature painter. I kind of started from that, all the hobby side of things. But I got enamored with the idea that you could literally do things other than just chase down dragons and go to castles and do. It felt so restrictive, even though, as it's been proven many times over, that Dungeons and Dragons does have a very expansive world set. You can go to different places, you can do different things, but the idea that immediately there are guns and there are, you know, mysteries and there's horror and there's all this other stuff that you can put into a game, it really intrigued me. And at the time, there wasn't a whole lot of other things because I had yet to discover Chaosium. But that happened soon enough, and I started to play games that were really narratively driven and were focusing more and more on the horror elements. And I took all this love that I developed over the years, and I started to really pour it into the role-playing. And because, like many forever GMs, you sort of realize that nobody's going to play if you don't start it. And so you start throwing the games, like offering the space and bringing people in and telling the stories. And as you do that, accidentally almost, you start to become better and better at it. And I just kept going, and I wanted to keep doing this. And my friends and I went through many, many different games. And as I started to progress, I started to realize that there were holes in the industry. There were things that I wasn't seeing out there. And I discovered the indie rag scene where you've got all these great one-page RPGs and that there's a whole renaissance that's slowly happening. And here we are now in what I really do consider the golden age of role-playing, where we have so many opportunities, so many options, and horror is now a very real subset of all of that. Through a series of encounters, I actually became very involved with Geek and Sundry, and I started to work a lot with Ivan Van Norman, who is one of the founders of Hunters Entertainment. And Ivan is a very busy man. And I started to just pick up his slack. I'm like, hey, you need me to do something here? Great, I'll do it. And sooner or later, at some point in that whole adventure, I ended up taking over and sort of like helping to steer where we're at now, along with some really amazing people like Markia. And we're so excited about where horror is going, and we're focusing on it. And we're really excited to be here today. I'm super thankful. Thank you, Crystal, for having us.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. If you guys didn't know, these guys were panelists last year on a horror panel. We were doing Horror 101. And so they all came and wanted to do another one, and I thought that they are such experts. We're going to actually focus on tone and theme today in horror, and so we are really going to deep dive into that. If you are just kind of scratching the surface of horror, I do have 2 other panels, Horror 101 later today in this room. I think it's at like 2 o'clock. I want to say it's 2 o'clock. Something like, it is? Okay. Please come to that. We are actually going to be going over the horror genre as a whole and some of the games and stuff like that that you can play. Also, this panel is an hour and a half, and I understand that some people just cannot do that. If you do need to leave, just feel free to peace out more quietly. So, what I every single panel that I talk about, specifically with horror, is always going to have safety tools. And I want to talk about it in the context of the tone and theme of horror games. And so I just want to touch briefly upon that. And then there are a couple of other questions that I came up with as we get deeper in that involve safety tools. So kind of circling back to this conversation. So what safety tools do you use, or safety things do you put in place? I know some like home games don't have any. Which is fine for that table if it works for you guys, but always knowing your options and having something available for players is always nice to have, especially when you're really going deep into something. So, who would like to start with that?
Do like snake drafts, like we go around?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You wanna start?
No.
You know, that's a really broad question. I know we have an hour and a half, so let's dig into it. I use a number of tools, and I've evolved and learned as we've kind of like progressed and moved forward with a lot of our games. I think that what Markia was talking about before was really the first public game of horror that I was really running for a long period of time, and it was a three-year game. So we learned a lot about each other, and we learned about kind of a lot of things that you can do. Performative role play is something that I think is intrinsic to not just people who are going on to Twitch or YouTube or trying to bring that forward. This is a narrative art. We're telling stories. And as a part of that, we're working together in a collaborative room. I'm not telling anybody anything new here, but I'm prefacing all this so that I can get to really the heart of what I'm trying to say, which is when you're in that space and you're sharing that space, the game master is only part of that. And I know that there are gamers out there that feel that there's a power shift, but it really is more about facilitation. And if you're the game master, what you're doing is you're providing a space. You're creating a world. You're making a bubble for your players to live within. And it's a very giving role. It's very generous, but it's also something that has a deep need for empathy. And I think this is true of any game. But if you're actually doing horror, all of this ramps up to 10. The reason that I think we all love horror is because it is so extreme. Because we're taking ourselves to the really far ratty edges of emotion, and we're challenging each other. And so for me, horror is like a really good tennis match. Or I hate sports metaphors. Why did I say that? But it, for lack of a better term, it's a game where you're passing the baton back and forth, right? It's not just about what you as the game master can provide. But since you're in charge of the space and the world that you're creating, you have to find a way to communicate with those players. Because in that facilitation, you're going to empower them. You want them to take the reins, you want them to be able to run the story, but you want them to offer you something. And what you can do, for me at least, every game that I do, there is 2 things that I always use, which is, first of all, session 0, which is important in any game, just so that you can get to know people and you know what you're trying to do. But that allows you a forum to bring people in and to really get to know them. Find out what's on the table and what's off the table. There are a number of different ways to do this. Sometimes it's better to individually talk to people and then bring them all into one space so that someone feels comfortable revealing, truths about themselves that maybe they don't want to reveal in a large group setting. You have to be receptive to whatever it is that your player's offering. Find the things that they're willing to explore. Some of us have things that we don't get a chance to really face, and those things can be very cathartic and fun fears to kind of dig into, and you want to find what they're okay with. But just as importantly as finding how far you can push that fear. Like if somebody's afraid of spiders, but not to the point where they're actually arachnophobic, and just the mention of it or hearing about it, or somebody does a real visceral description of spiders, all of a sudden somebody just nopes out, they're triggered, and you've ruined the game. This is not something that is without benefit to everyone. So I know that there's in some circles there's the idea, well, we don't need safety tools because moving forward like this is going to make it edgier and raw. You're making a mistake there, because what you want is to make it as edgy and raw as you can without crossing the line. And as soon as you cross those lines, unbeknownst to you, you've popped the tires on your entire game because somebody at the table is shut down. So a session 0 is essential. How you run that, we could talk about it for an hour and a half, I'm sure, but I will say that. And then at the table, having something that will allow you to visually, easily communicate the mindset and the understanding that you have with your players. Now, there's a couple of different ways to do this. We've used a lot of different tools. My favorite tool that we've been using and I've used and incorporated into a couple of games is a traffic light system where you have a visual that you can point to, and lines and veils are great and all of that, but if it's unspoken and not, I've found more than once running really extreme horror that people find things that they don't know about until that very moment that you've described it is a trigger point. And you want somebody to be able to communicate to you in a way that they feel comfortable. Some people don't feel comfortable saying, hold on, stop the game. I can't do this. Give them an easy out. Just moving, like I use chess pieces. You can move a chess piece from green to yellow. And as soon as that chess piece is on yellow, you know we're in the zone that you as the game master should really be paying attention to everything happening around you. How are they reacting? Are they okay? And sometimes you need to put the stop on it before, because maybe they don't really realize that it's hard. You got to realize what's performative and what's real. But if you watch people long enough, you'll know. It's in their eyes. Like, maybe this is doing damage. We should stop and check in. Checking in is an easy thing to do. It doesn't ruin your narrative. And then if they go from yellow to red for any reason at all, it's your responsibility to put the stop on it and to find out what that is, evaluate it, find out if you can go back into the game, and then do it. And do it in a respectful way that doesn't call anybody out or make them feel lesser than for having said, you know what, this bothers me. I didn't know that I had a thing about eyes, but now I do.
Everyone has a thing about eyes. That's normal.
I have a thing about describing things being put into eyes. All right.
Contact lens.
Yeah. I've spoken enough. I'm sure there's a lot.
So 3 things out of what Nox was saying. If you're interested in seeing our game Outbreak Undead, it is on YouTube, youtube.com/huntersbooks. Plenty of seasons for you to really get into the nitty gritty with everything. 2, I don't know tennis very well, but there are no batons.
I don't know. Clearly.
And 3, just to delve for any international listeners or people that are in the room, in America, we have the traffic light system is green, yellow, and red. Meaning point. Green is completely, go for it. Everything's cool. We're in the clear. I'm on board with what you're doing. Yellow is, whoa, okay, I didn't know, but that might be a thing for me. Let's do a fade to black on this scene and move forward. That's what a yellow means. Where it's like, I'm not comfortable with this. I'm willing to go along, but we're creeping forward. And then red is a full stop. Something happened. We can talk about it if that's the kind of table that you have, but otherwise it's like, nope, next scene. It's like that is the nope. Something that I would like to talk about with safety tools. There is a very big difference, like nuance wise, with what you see on Twitch, like what Nox was saying, the performative tabletop role-playing games, and then what you have in your home games with people you may or may not know, or when you're at a convention and you may or may not know. In a way, I feel, and I'll go on the record with this, that performative TTRPGs can be a tiny bit toxic because you are very aware that you have an audience, so you will let things slide that normally you wouldn't, and like afterwards you'll talk to someone unless it puts you into the red zone. I've talked to people after games, and I always use the term co-create, whether I'm a GM or a player, because we are literally co-creating this world together. And I've talked to fellow players, and they'll be like, wow, if we had been in a home game, I would have shut it down right then. But because we were in the middle of a show and it was live, I waited until another hour afterwards. It's like, but that sat on me the entire time. So keep that in mind for if you're going to do the Twitch element of things or Kick or whatever platform, that if you're going to do that, having that session 0, checking in with your players ahead of time is going to help you retain players, both in attendance and their respect for you. Because then it's, you care about what they are bringing to the table as much as you do for yourself, for what scenarios and everything that you've developed for their characters. Other quick safety tools, if there are some that have issues with reading body language, but you can come up with something very simple. Be like, hey, I put my hand on my shoulder, and it's like, even this is like, I'm not comfortable right now. Obviously, this is me doing this, meaning to, and I'm like gripping my shoulder. That can be a very simple, focus attention thing on that person, but you see them, you're like, oh, okay. So yeah, we're gonna move on from the spiders into people's eyes thing, and now we're on to this instead. And then just another quick fun thing, that when someone has their limits and they have told you their limits, we'll just say spiders, because I'm not going to talk about eyes right now. We'll say it's spiders. That gives you the opportunity to be more imaginative with things. Maybe they hate spiders, but maybe they're really cool with disembodied hands that like move around and go like, what's his name? Cousin It? Yeah, maybe they're real cool with that. The thing. Cousin It's the hair. Yeah. Okay, that's a whole different thing. So like maybe they're cool with that. So maybe instead of spiders, you have a bunch of those in your haunted house, and then you can go off to the races. So it really is an opportunity for you and for them to grow.
It's pretty hard to add on to what Nox and Markia said there. I think I would say is this, it might sound like, if some of this stuff is new to you, it might sound like, oh, that's a lot of work, particularly for those of you who are taking notes. I think it's just, it's about like setting your mindset and how you perceive these things. Like there are some, I guess we can call them people. There are some people who think that safety tools are ruining gaming and things like that, where it's actually like the complete opposite, because you might have, like say for instance, I really like body horror, right? I think that's really cool. It upsets me in the correct way. Yeah, the Cronenberg and stuff. Yeah. And there's some people who, that would be in the red zone for them. That's right. And maybe I really want to run a body horror game, and if I can find people who are all okay with that, and I know where their limits are, what their colors are for everything, and I can match it all up. I know, this is my perfect body horror game. We can explore all the fun things about body horror that we want to do. That's just an example. It actually allows you, using these kind of systems, allows you to have a deeper, more trustworthy experience of horror. Like Nox said, like a lot of us like horror because we like extremes, and what you think is extreme, what you're comfortable with, is completely different to somebody else's. It's a lot like comedy. Like what makes me laugh may not make you laugh. And like you said, like a comedian's job, like a horror GM's job, is to go up to the line without crossing it. And once you cross the line, it's no good, right? Some tools that I use, I think I talked about them last year, but no one mentioned them yet, is, and I'm going to get it wrong, I'm pretty sure it was put out by Monte Cook Games. It's called the RPG Consent Checklist. It's free to download. It basically is a whole list of inverted commas, common trigger points and things, and it actually has, for each one of them, it has a red, yellow, or green spot for you to tick. And there's also some blank space for people to add custom ones. So what you can do is I generally send these out to all my players, separately, And I tell them, look, you can send it back. I'll obviously know who it's coming from. And then what I'll do is I will remove everybody's names and share them all with everybody. So that way people can feel comfortable to share, ideally share their trigger points without necessarily saying, oh yeah, that was me, because sometimes we have sensitivities that we don't necessarily want to share with everybody, right? Now, you can do that by just keeping with the GM. However, what I found is it is kind of important for everybody to know what all the no-go zones are, because if somebody, especially in a horror game, starts to, maybe do some body horror without knowing that, my friend Sally is really not okay with body horror, but we didn't tell everybody that. That's a whole other different thing, right? But yeah, that's all I would say is just if you've got any pushback or any hesitancy about this kind of thing, or it's like, oh, why can't we just dive into it? We're going to talk about session 0 soon too. It just change your mindset and this is actually a very important tool, not just for people's safety, but it will make your game so much better. Especially if, like me and you've been in a situation where you're either at a game at a table and you're like, I'm not sure if everyone's cool with this right now, so I can't enjoy myself even if I am cool with it. So yeah, that's what.
Can I add something? We've been talking about all this, and I realize if you're running the games, even if you're a player, it's possible that during this process you're going to make a mistake. You're going to go too far. You're going to cross that line and not know it. It's just as important to be able to immediately own that mistake and move forward and fix it. Whatever it takes to correct the situation, find out what that is. In doing this, it's something that is much more, it's an easier thing to do, to make a mistake. And it doesn't mean that making the mistake is egregious and you're never gonna, regain the trust of the people around you. That will only happen if you don't own up to the mistake and, place it back on the player or the other player and not correct the situation. Ownership of mistakes is something that I think is really important because it allows you to correct and to improve not only yourself as a game master or a player, but also the gaming experience for everybody involved.
And also, I just want to point out or give permission. You don't necessarily have to have hard stops that are fears. For instance, I'm a teacher. I'm a middle school teacher. My students are old enough to be able to search my name on the internet, and I am on actual plays where I am murdering people. And so I don't ever want them to see me creating violence against children.
Sure.
Yeah.
And so that is a hard stop for me because not only could that be traumatizing for them, but also I work in a conservative school district, which is even more. I'm very open about it, so my administration knows that I do this stuff, so they are aware of it. But parents may not necessarily be. My students are, but that's their middle schoolers. That sometimes doesn't get communicated, and parents might stumble upon this too. And then how does that look on the school district then when they knew about this? And, so that is a hard stop for me only because of my job, but also the fact that I'm also earning trust with my kids. Mm-hmm. And seeing something like that could be really traumatic for a child.
Yeah.
So I say child, I mean middle schooler, but yeah.
that is another good thing about the tool I mentioned, the RPG consent checklist. It isn't just a list of fears. There are it's very specific actions that are in there.
Like romance, for instance.
Yes, literally,
So
horror.
are you comfortable with a player character romancing an NPC character? Okay, great. So how comfortable? Flirting? Yes. Okay. On-screen kissing? Okay. More than that, explicit? No. Oh, okay, no problem. Yep. Or NPC and NPC, PC and PC. So it really is a fantastic tool, and I've used it in so many different games now.
I was just going to say that as a game master, the indie scene actually uses a term that I really like, and Spencer Stark actually has, I think, popularized it with Alice is Missing, but the term facilitator. If you have things that you as the game master don't want in your game,
you have to consent to the stuff that you
your consent is a part of this. Again, it's not about trying to push past because you're trying to give your players an experience. If you're doing damage to yourself, that's not good for anybody either. And letting your players know up front what you're not going to be doing. We're not going to be playing a game that causes harm to children. That's not going to happen. And that lets them know that when they run into that child NPC,
Yep.
you're not
No
going to
one's,
do
no
anything.
one's gripping.
Yeah.
No one's white
No one's-
knuckling like what's going to happen here.
Yep.
Yeah, no.
And if you really want like an actual real world example of this, Dimension 20, A Crown of Candy, several of the players have struggled so hard with that actual play, and they talk about it. They talked about what they did afterwards, how they were able to continue those relationships and look other people in the eye that were doing horrible things to each other, because it's a Game of Thrones style Candyland. Like, if you're not familiar with it, it's really awesome actual play if you like actual plays. But it was horrific. And a lot of the players struggled with that. And they do talk about that in some of the interviews and stuff like that. Watch those and see how they did that, because you can take parts of that to incorporate in your own games.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now we get to go into some of the other deeper stuff. So we're going to talk about what is tone and what is theme. Because like is it the same as like a literary standpoint, or is it different when it moves into RPGs? And how do we represent that in a game? How do we convey that without outright saying, this is the tone, this is the theme? Is it implied? Is it open for interpretation? How far do you want that open? Because it can get interpreted way different for some people. Mm-hmm. So how do you, as you're writing these things and as a game master, kind of set those limits? And what are they? Like, for both tone, what is it?
Was that a snake joke? What was the
Tone
question?
and theme, what is it? And then how do you represent it?
Tone and theme, and how do you represent it? Okay, I'm on the spot here. Sorry, I was replying to a Slack.
We knew that. That's why we...
I know, that's what you're pointing at now. I feel so bad now. Are we talking just really broadly?
You can
Tone
get
and
as
theme?
deep
Deep as
or
you
as
want.
broad as you would like.
Look, one of the things, we did touch on this last year as well, and you mentioned something that I've been doing since then. And because this came up, and look, it's a broad topic, but one of the core things is how do you maintain the mood at your table with the tone. There's this thing with D&D, which it feels to be pretty common, and y'all can tell me if you're wrong, if I'm wrong. But there's this concept of the world is serious, the player characters are not. Seems to be sort of like a sort of joke. Like I saw the D&D movie on the plane on the way here. I'm like, oh yeah, it's like it's all very fun and jokey. And because D&D is so prevalent, a lot of people do bring aspects of that, like, oh, I'm going to try and make a joke or a comedic thing in your game, and it can sort of it can break the mood when that kind of thing happens. It doesn't have to be comedy though. There can be anything that can sort of break the mood you're going for, particularly if you're running a game where it's like very personal horror, like vampire, werewolf, or hunter, or anything like that, right? And the thing that you mentioned last year that I've since employed is now I may be misquoting you.
Oh,
it was
yeah.
a year ago.
I'm right here.
You
So I'll
said,
let you know.
you said something like, I don't react, and you just stare and you acknowledge it, but you just stone-faced continue.
I've broken him a number of
Yeah,
times.
oh, you have? Oh, okay.
Rarely.
But mainly he does the straight. I'm the person that you're talking about. Well, I believe that.
Oh, was it you? Pardon me.
No.
Yeah.
Let me use
Oh,
words.
She's the
No,
jokester.
no.
You're the
I'm a
jokester.
jokester. I wield my power responsibly. Always use humor and horror responsibly. You're not trying to steal focus. You're not trying to shift the tone of the piece. You're not trying to make it into a horror comedy. What you're doing, what I feel like I do with humor, is I just make it very relatable and very human. For me, that in a life or death situation, I feel like there needs to be a pressure valve of a very human moment. And for me, those human moments just tend to be pretty humorous in the circumstances. So, everybody looks at each other at table, we laugh for a second, and then, Nox kills me. So, I mean, it's entirely possible. As far as it's a learnable skill. Not everybody has the comedic timing with things. I do recommend, now that the world has opened up to a certain point, of doing things like taking an improv class, taking an acting class, get to know where those pauses are, the dramatic pauses, the comedic pauses. I mean, maybe you'll find yourself in like a whole new side quest of your life where you're just like, oh, I'm in community theater now, and I'm living it up. I'm doing the whiz, you know, in Indianapolis, which actually I would see that.
I would. Yep.
I would watch the whiz in Indianapolis. I wonder how they do that. Sorry.
They just put it on Sunday. It's just, you know, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. They're practicing. Sunday's the show.
Sunday's the show. Do it. But yeah, I mean, something like that is just going to help you also grow as a person. And you growing as a person is great for everybody. Great for you. Great for the people around you. So yeah, so I'm gonna be the gray area when it comes to humor.
I mean, I use a lot of things like there's some. You could say these are common basic things, but the lighting in your room and the music that you put on can make a really big difference. I would love to hear your thoughts because I still struggle to maintain mood when apparently my World of Darkness group can only meet at like 2 p.m. on a Tuesday and it's sunny outside and I live in a very bright, you know, that's like, how can you do that? Whereas you prefer to play at night with music and things like that. If you're running a game, I think a really important thing to do is learn or practice, I guess the word for it would be pacing. And I don't mean the overall pacing of the story, I mean the pacing of how you're presenting scenes and such. So I come from like literary writing background. There's a very sort of 101 example of, you know, if you're writing in a scene that's very tense or action-packed, you use very short sentences. So it's like things that are happening one after another. Then when it's things more language, you can take, you know, you can do a run-on sentence or a longer sentence. But the structure of those sentences has an effect on the reader to you know, basically tell them without telling them that things are tense. And I've found that to really drive up the tone and intensity of scenes is I slow right down. If I like, say if they're opening a door to, you know, like a horrible murder scene, I won't do it now just in case there is any lines and veils going on, but you know, if you're describing something this is going to be a big intense moment, I slow right down, and between each sentence, like I wait a few seconds, and I notice when I do that, no one's interrupting. Because one, they don't have all the information yet, so they can't set up their joke. But they doing things like that in certain scenes, I find really drives home the intensity. And when you, as the GM or keeper or storyteller, whatever the word you want to use is piloting that vehicle, and I also find that once everybody in that room has that level of trust, which is actually really built upon with, you know, the safety tools in place, everyone follows in, and it really makes for a much more consistent experience. But if it's sunlight outside, I can't do it. Sorry, that's
blackout curtains.
Well, yeah. Borrow some money?
Blackout curtains is actually a good note. I mean, listen, the lighting, the sound, all these things are really important because horror, like I think all good experiential narrative storytelling, is about every sense. You know, get some candles, you know, find ways that you can surprise your players because, like we've already been talking about, you know, so much about tone and the expression of that story is about pacing, but it's also about being able to, while you're pacing, read the room and make choices based on what needs to happen next. And this is where the improv classes can help because it's not even so much about you being a good actor or performer, it's about you being able to train your brain on how to shift gears at a moment's notice. This is a learnable skill. Anybody can do this. And like anything, some people are more prone to being good at it from the start just based on whatever their background is or whatever those factors might be, but you can learn these things. And you know, there's not really any GM classes out there that are going to really teach you this stuff, but there are so many different things that have been around for centuries, you know, about performance and about not just performance, but narrative storytelling. Because as writers, it's the same thing. Take ownership of that. And you know, we're talking about comedy and horror. They're so closely related, it's silly. I mean, these are two sides of the same coin. And pacing is essential to both. Now, when you're talking about D&D and all that, yeah, pacing's important, and you know, action, and that there's a timing thing, a component there as well. But it's kind of it's not a symphony, you know. In my mind, it's small band, it's got 4 pieces, you know? But when you're dealing with every tool in your toolkit and you're really bringing out all the stops, you've got so many things that you can incorporate and you can bring to the table to give your players a full experience. If you want tone and pacing and all of that worked into your game, find the things that, again, you can do to let your players know this is not D&D. I would keep coming back on it. I'm not trying to trash on D&D.
No, we're not.
This isn't
like,
that game.
For
this
those that are
is.
listening, he's wearing like a shirt that says D&D in a big old circle and a red
I've
dash through it.
actually got worse. Can I confess to something, everybody? And you might kill me after I say this. I've never actually played a game.
Get out.
Now, I have played a lot of Pathfinder, and I'm told they're similar.
Oh
Oh my God.
get out of
Why
here.
are you still here?
You knew what you just said. Look, I mean, yeah, so it's very much the thing that you want to bring people to the table and just break their expectation. You know, that can be as simple as a candle or turning the lights down low. People's mindsets immediately react to that, and they want to get engaged. Your job, if you are the keeper, the facilitator, the game master, whatever that might be, is to provide them with that experience. I mean, you know, take some glee in shaking things up. One of my favorite tools is finding ways to genuinely create jump scares. Now, you might think, oh, you can't do that at the table. You can do that at a table. You have to build the right tone. You have to have people on the edge of their seat. And really, it's all about building towards it. Everything you do before the jump scare is very important. If I came in and just slapped on the table, some people might do that, but that's not because I just slapped on the table. That's just distracting. You have to earn it. And to earn it, you slowly build. The quieter and slower everything is before the pound or whatever that might be is going to get people's attention.
There is a Game Master series that you can find on YouTube. Geek and Sundry did it. If you, youtube.com/Geek and Sundry, and you actually, I think it's legit called Game Master series. I'm on 2 episodes, and that is me
Is
and
it
Amy.
Game Master Tips? Is that? No, it's.
Do
Do you know the name of it? We should know, but we don't.
Yeah.
We're-
I'm sorry. I thought I heard a noise over there. I'm not giving you homework to look that up.
You look that up.
You have
wasn't
Google.
it.
Tell us what that is.
It's called Game Master something, and it has a nice title to it, and I'm sure someone workshopped it very hard, and I'm just not remembering it right now. But I'm on 2 episodes there. One with Amy Vorpal, where me and Amy talk about exactly what Brian's talking about, like building the atmosphere and things that you can do, like different tools, like incorporating poetry, incorporating aromatherapy. You know, how to Pavlov's dog your table, kind of a thing. And then the other one I'm doing with Eric Campbell, and we're talking about how to populate your world with NPCs and to make them real people, you know, in your universe and different tools. So there's like 8 episodes, and to go ahead and check that out too.
I just sort of building again on what you all said and repeating myself from earlier. Like some of you might be hearing this stuff, you know, like getting candles, getting blackout curtains, you know, really creating the mood. I would say, you know, put a little Wonder Boom, like little microphone things in the microphone speakers in the middle of the table, and connect to your phone, and like you know, throw a couple of bucks to the people at like Sirenscape for like those, like the mood, the soundboards they do in addition to the music. That's definitely worth it. And again, like the safety tools, this might sound like, oh geez, this is a lot of work, but it really makes a difference. And I remember watching. I'm a big. You could tell. I'm a really big fan of the program Deadwood. If you've ever seen that. So Ian McShane, who played one of the characters in who's one of the stars of Deadwood, they were talking about it in an interview, and he said there was no acting required because they just built a town and everyone was dressed up, and it's like when you get there, you're like, oh, okay, this is what's happening.
This is it, yeah.
Yeah, and that's like when you walk in, you're like, oh, all right, the tone is already set, and I'm here, and you know, some of you might be like, oh, isn't it a bit tacky to like light candles? Like, you could argue it, but like, you know, it's only once you turn the lights back on, right? Once you walk in there, it's like, it's something, I would say, dreadfully human about that atmosphere. And I think everybody understands it.
I think it takes practice too. I mean, I don't think it's like, oh, I got the mood right the first time. You know, like find out what works and what doesn't work. Everybody's an individual. Some people are going to react to different things differently. It goes back to the same thing. Know yourself and know your players.
There's a certain psychology to using the same type of feeling in the room every time that you play, even if you come back. Like even using the same type of scent, the same lighting scheme, everything like that, even the same like sound as you walk in. gets everybody into that mood of the very first game and into that mindset. If you really, really want to trick your players, I worked at haunted houses for many, many years. And
Really?
That's
very cool.
like 17 years I was a volunteer at a haunted house, and it was one of the top-rated haunted houses in Wisconsin for several of those years. And one of the tricks is if you really want to scare somebody without ever doing a jump scare, use clove essential oil.
Oh.
Because clove essential oil is what they use in dentist's office to numb your teeth. And it will start making people think and get that feeling of, oh God, something is wrong, but they won't be able to place it.
Yeah. And fun fact, cloves are used in hexing by witches. So
Yeah.
there's something there.
Sometimes,
Yes.
Different
Something-
panel, but yes.
Different panel.
Yeah.
Different panel, but yes. So if you really want to play on the psychology of that, clove oil is where you want to go with that. And we had a dentist on in the haunted house who did that, and every time that people walked in the room, they're like, "Oh God, it smells like a dentist office. This is my worst nightmare."
This is the 301 panel, so I'm assuming everyone in the room knows this, but have all of you played 10 Candles?
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
If you haven't, write it down.
Yes.
Because,
It's a
you know,
one sheet. It's
Yeah.
very
Very good.
easy to do.
the fact that it's
Yeah.
built into the mechanic, you're watching this candle burn down, that's the life of each player. You can bring these things in, or Dread, which uses a tower of Jenga, which you're not allowed to say Jenga, it's a building tower, a puzzle block tower. Our world. Anyway, you push these little blocks around, and that represents something physical that then relates to the danger that people are in. They're tense because of it, because they have a visual representation of everything going wrong. And I use that stuff in my game all the time. Take whatever you can get that your players will react to build that tension. And it could be as simple as putting, and I've done this before, Markia earmuffs. I just don't want you to know my secrets.
I'm like, what's he about to say?
Nothing to do with eyes. Just,
Okay.
Markia's been in my games, and I guess it was a joke. But like, I put boxes on the table, and I don't say what's in the box.
What is it? Don't worry about it.
And three sessions later,
He'll
they find
like
out.
position it.
Yeah.
It's like a silver briefcase, and he'll like slide it across the table, sit it there, and look us in the face, and then walk away. It's like,
And this is what I was going to say that I didn't want Markia to hear. Most of the time, it's empty. But then it isn't, because I'm paying attention to them, and I find out what to put into it based on what they do.
Yep.
What needs to be in the briefcase is going to be determined by what the players choose. Sometimes you can just figure it out. Too.
Sorry, that was another thing, just on what you said
Yeah,
then. Going back to the safety tools thing with the RPG consent checklist, those are also cheat sheets to find out what to
Yep.
put in your game as well. And it makes you and you're like, wow, that game was really scary. It's like, yeah, I'm not good, you know?
To own it.
Yeah.
Okay, so we talked, this mainly focused on like tone, right? Because horror, no matter what genre of horror, is generally going to have the same type of tone. And you can kind of layer the theme and the genre over it. So you can still have like a scary setup where you have, candles going and everything like that. And you can still do comedy horror with that.
Yeah.
oh yeah.
So what I want to talk about is we all kind of glossed over theme.
Pardon me. Sorry, that was me because I screwed up the stuff.
And that actually fits because, like, as a teacher, theme is one of the hardest things for people to learn. And so it kind of makes sense that we all kind of skirted around that. And as a teacher, we're gonna talk about this.
Well, thank you.
So from a literary standpoint and from a teaching standpoint, theme is like the lesson that you take away or like the big message. It is not really anything. If you're reading a book, theme is not usually spelled outright in a book unless it's something like a fable or a fairy tale. And so how does that really apply to horror? Because is there a lesson to learn, or is there some other bigger message? For instance, Night of the Living Dead. We can talk about that for hours.
Definitely could.
Or is it literally, you are learning a lesson, here it is, and what you do with that as both a GM and even like your approach to coming up with stories?
Well, for instance, something that I like to say with 10 candles, I mean, when you said that, theme just came to me. For
10
me,
Candles is amazing
it's
for
amazing.
everything, by the
So-
way. You guys should check it out.
it's like, yeah, it's like it's such a touchstone. I mean, you know, hats off. Something that I keep in mind as a theme for that is that we're all gonna die. Isn't that grand? We're all gonna die. It's gonna be spectacular. How do we live? We're gonna die. How do we live? How do we human with that? So that's my theme for 10 Candles. Like this time around, is my character the kind that someone falls, they help them up, you know, and, you know, help them run along? Or am I kicking them in the face and making sure they stay down so I can get further away from the they that is following us? So it's, how do you live? You know, how do you emote? Another way for like thematics for me is I'll do, okay, because you brought up in, you know, Living Dead. I love zombie movies. It's cathartic for me. I like the political ramifications for it, about like how zombies have progressed throughout our culture, throughout zeitgeist. You know, how fast they move depends on where we are technology-wise. I mean, I've had these very intense conversations about it. What I love about zombies in movies is that it really tells us how we are as humans in crisis. And that's what it is with zombies. So for me, for a theme, like I'll let's say World War Z. Wait, is that a good one to choose? Is there a different one that everybody might have in here for a zombie movie wise?
I Am Legend.
I Am Legend. Oh, that's a good one.
Vampire people.
I really
It's like,
Vampire
yeah,
zombies?
you know,
Is
you
it
know,
infected?
it's like the other, it's the infected.
Yeah.
I mean, 28 days
Section.
later is,
Yeah.
you know, they're infected with rage, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, viral.
So,
Yeah.
viral. Basically, a viral outbreak that incapacitates people's normal biological rhythms and turns them into the other. And then how do we interact with the other? Do we shoot them in the head, because that's the way to bring them down? Or do we try to capture them, like in I Am Legend, and try to cure, but in the same way, literally become, you know, Frankenstein's monster by all this experimentation and everything, like literally becoming the bad guy while you're trying to be the good guy. So, so yeah, when it comes with themes, with zombies, when I'm in something co-creating a world that involves zombies, I do think of the theme that I want it to be for the people there. I did a short campaign for Hyper RPG when we were doing a 10 Candles like magnum opus. We did like 10 months of 10 Candles, same cast, in different scenarios. Think of like American Horror Story, but 10 Candles, we did that. I took a small part of it called The Afflicted, and you can, I'm very certain this is on YouTube. I'm going to steer everybody to YouTube. I believe youtube.com, hyperrpg. If you put in The Afflicted, AFFLICTED, I did 3 episodes there, and my zombies, I made it a thing where EPA standards had fallen off, and we basically irradiated a bunch of cockroaches that then, through their evolution, became like zombie cockroaches that then infected the populace. And then it was more of a hive mind type of situation. And the driving force for them was to infect us all, because then we would all be part of the hive mind, the afflicted. So for me, it was, how are you working on a team? Because it's you versus them, or are they right? Because they were starting to rebuild society in a different way, and we were still killing each other and still trying to kill them and kill ourselves. So for me, that was a very long way of saying that's how I feel like thematically for zombies.
Yeah, I think theme is even more so when we're talking about mood. Like we're talking about dressing up a room, blacking out the curtains. You can be playing one of your players' house, and they can do that for you. I think the theme really comes back even more so to the GM. That's not to say that we're more important than the players. We're definitely not. That's a whole other panel. But it comes into the narrative that you are driving. And in the same way that, like, you know, if we were to all play Werewolf the Apocalypse and we just roll up characters and you know, this isn't a rag on D&D, but if we take those characters and just do a dungeon, it's like, well, I mean, why don't we just play D&D? Like, there's a reason you choose to play these other games. And a lot of them will when you read them, they'll pretty explicitly tell you, you know, what they're trying to say, what their theme is. If you're playing vampire, it's like, I am a monster, lest a monster I become. What does that mean? Like, unpack that. That means the game is about, you know, what does it look like to hold on to your humanity? What does morality look like? And then you need to make sure that those sort of moral quandaries come up in your game. And maybe they won't, and that's okay, but I think you have a responsibility if you're interested in exploring the theme of that game. Again, at the end of the day, do whatever you want with your table if everybody wants to do it, but if you're wanting to explore the themes presented that the game, and a lot of the time the mechanics and the lore is structured around, I think it very much behooves you to sort of focus on that. Like, there's a very underrated World of Darkness game called Promethean the Created.
So good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's very good.
It's so good.
It's very good. Check it out. But the ultimate goal of that game is to find out, what does it mean to be human? That is a very, very deep subject, and you can do super exciting things. And I probably talk about Call of Cthulhu, but Call of Cthulhu, it's about, you know, the unknowable, unimaginable horrors from beyond space and time, and that's very broad and confusing because it's supposed to be. And a thing that I practice in a lot of Call of Cthulhu things is there's two types of endings to things. There's like closed ending, right, where everything's wrapped up in a neat little package, you know, and then there's open endings where things are not explained. And I almost always do that, and some people get annoyed. It's like, I didn't find out what the monolith in the ancient monolith that we found and we didn't find out what that meant. I'm like, no, and you probably never will. And that's kind of the point, because humans are not meant to know everything, and that's what I think the theme of Call of Cthulhu is. You know, that's the kind of but you know, we could play that where I'm like, yeah, and this is exactly what that means, and this is it, and everybody, good, we're done now. Like, and you could do that, but that's not going to drive home the theme of the game you're playing. So, yeah.
Well, I know that this can be really intimidating to people who are not used to thinking in this way or running games in this way, but it's so rewarding. And again, there are so many tools out there that you can kind of utilize that, you know, maybe we can guide you to some of those. If anybody wants to find us on the internet, I know everybody on this panel, I speak for them in this, we're happy to point you in some directions.
If you didn't tell.
Yeah. But speaking about theme, I have a couple of tools and tricks that I have specifically that might help you. For me, theme, you know, it's sometimes very obvious, but I think that you have, as a game master facilitator, something kind of different than if you were just writing a book or making a movie. You have other people at the table who are helping you to co-create. So I always have the apparent theme and the hidden theme. And the apparent theme is what I start with. I know that I'm running a zombie apocalypse game and that survival's on the forefront. And I know that because Rag and Bone is our first series, and I knew that right off the bat we were going to come and it was going to be about these survivors. The whole series is based on people who travel between communities and bring people the things that they need. They're a caravan. And what they do is, you know, there are no highways, there's no other way to get things through, and you had to be a badass to traverse these open wildernesses filled with the undead. And so Rag and Bone is about a group of survivors, many of them died, that made that journey and would travel around and kind of knew this emerging, like, civilization that was burgeoning. And if they stopped doing what they did, all these communities died. And so that theme was really about survival in the sense of how does being the lifeline to a community affect a group of people, you know? And of course there's zombies, and it's about dead and not becoming the monster, or you become the monster and now you have to be put down because you're bit. How do you survive with all that? That was on the top. But it wasn't until we got about, you know, a few months into the game that the real theme started to emerge, and that was because of what the players gave me. The theme very quickly became about love for each other, and love for individualism, and how you survive, and not only survive, how do you thrive, but who do you trust? Where do you open yourself up? You're hardened now by a world that you can't imagine. Does that mean that you stop being human? Are you just as dead as the people around you?
You're going to try.
I'm right. I'm correct. And so, like, here's a good example too. Like, if you watch your movies and series and all that, you can do the reverse engineering. So try to like think of things that way, and it's going to help you because then you can start to build things your own way. Last of Us is about survival. It's about zombies. It's really about fatherhood, you know. And there are lots of ways that you can kind of find out what your primary and your sub theme are, and try to hide the subtext. I think theme isn't meant to be on your shoulder unless it is a fairy tale, or unless that's part of the style that you're trying to run. You know, like morality play is great. You know, like if you're running something like that, and that, to be honest, that's how I run a lot of D&D. Is like, this is going to be very much like a fairy tale. We're going to run it this way. You're going to know what the themes are because it's going to be very, very apparent. Subtlety in horror is important if that's the tone that you're going for. Most horror plays into that. Not all horror. I mean, I guess you could even break down Shaun of the Dead. And like Shaun, I know we're still talking about zombie movies. Again, we can talk for 3 hours about them. But Shaun of the Dead has a completely different tone. But, you know, it's really about two best friends, you know. And so I think that it's not as scary as it seems if once you start kind of training your brain to think differently about the stories that you're ingesting and offering.
If you really want some nerd stuff, if you take a look at the hero's journey and you apply each of the sections to a story that would fit in within the hero's journey, and then analyze the theme in each of those sections, it's going to be different throughout. Your theme is going to change. It's going to evolve. It's going to end up being something. And what you analyze the theme as is not going to be the same thing as what someone else analyzes the theme as, because you come with different stuff than the other person does. So theme is going to be interpreted differently wherever you are in the story, wherever someone is in their personal character story. It's going to be different for them too. So you just be aware of that what you originally set out with the theme isn't necessarily what everyone else is going to interpret it as, unless you say this is the theme. It's going to be up for interpretation, and it's going to change and evolve, and by the time you get to the end of your story, it may be completely different.
Joseph Campbell has a bunch of dusty books that you can go get anywhere.
Yeah.
They're great books. They really are. They're written from a different time, but, you know, if you're familiar with Star Wars, you know that was definitely what was used by Lucas to kind of create the whole thing. But there's so much more to it than that, because I think that doesn't do it service. You know, dig into some of those classical sources, and you can actually find ways that you can move your stories forward uniquely. Take what you can get around you and then just regurgitate it in a new way.
Yep.
Octavia Butler is a really good resource for that as
Yeah.
well. Because her horror is true. It turned true. We live in it now. So, yeah.
So unfortunately, I do have to go because I've got a meeting. I know there's going to do some Q&A stuff. I'm going to leave one of my cards at the front here. If anyone wants to take a photo of it, it's got my email and Twitter on it. You can contact me.
I'm going to be at your panel tomorrow.
Okay, excellent. Cool. And yeah, I'll see everybody.
Amazing. Round of
Thank you.
applause.
Bye.
All right, so what I'm going to do is we have a little bit of time, and then I want to do a Q&A with everybody in the room here, give you guys some time. First off is, if you guys have tickets, at the end, can you guys please bring the tickets up here, just so that GenCon is using them for space. And so we sold out this panel, so the more tickets I can turn in, the bigger space we can get next year. Okay, so the other thing that I wanted to talk about is when you are playing around with horror and going deep into tone and theme, how do you pair that with safety mechanics so that you don't actually give away everything? So you keep your visceral horror or your like psychological horror without giving everything away through foreshadowing. So how do you kind of play around with that? That's kind of where we're circling back to the safety mechanics thing. Okay. That's a harder question.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of a.
So I'll lead with an example. So there are two. One is that I played in a Bluebeard's Bride game where
another great game.
It's another great game. And it's an actual play. You can find it. It was on the Virtual Horror Con, so it's on YouTube. And we, as a group, knew what the hard stops were for everybody. There was no names attached to it, but the whole game, you could see all the hard stops. So we kind of knew what we weren't going to see in the game.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've also played in horror games. I did a Wrath and Glory, which is horror, Wrath and Glory game, where we turned in our sheets to the GM, but nobody saw anybody else's sheets.
Mm-hmm.
So we didn't know other than our own. And we as players decided we weren't going to give away, like, if there's a hard stop and we know, and as a player, I know that I'm not going to give away my hard stops to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to kind of let other people think that we're edging closer to something and then it not end up being that way. So there was kind of like a psychological thing that the players decided upon to play off of. So those are like two examples of where we had all the hard stops. We didn't know whose hard stop it was, but like the Blueberry's Bride game ended up being one of the most horrific games I have ever played in, even knowing all of the hard stops. And then the other one was we all decided we didn't want to know the hard stops. We weren't going to give away our hard stops. So.
Okay. For going into that, I mean, I could give a couple of my tricks away that I do when co-creating worlds to have that safety element, but also keep enthusiasm for the world that you're in. I introduce a distracting element. I'll give you an example that I've done. Like I've given my players a corgi to band around. You know, it's like they have this corgi. It's the apocalypse, but they have this corgi, and they will literally die for that dog. So
Give them something they love is a really good note.
So it's distracting element. Give them something they can love or they can band together, something that holds the glue together, and then also how they react with that element, whether it's an NPC or dog or cat or whatever. It can be a talking amulet, depending on what your game is. Depending on how they react to that or circumstances that you have when you lightly threaten it, tells you about the mood of the party and how far you can push them in other things. So I'll have it where it's like, oh, this, horde of zombies is coming after, Amelia, the corgi. And it's like, we're coming for you, Amelia. I'd be like, okay, all right, go get Amelia. You're going to save Amelia. One of you's not going to, though. One of you's not going to make it. We'll let the dice decide. But I'll let them save the corgi. And they'll feel good about it, even if one of them dies. So, everybody's happy. Everybody's happy in that situation. Another thing that I'll do for a distracting element is that I will give them a big, shiny BEEG, big evil. I always mess
Big
up.
bad evil guy.
Big bad evil guy, a BBEG. I'll give them this big shining thing, then I'll give them such a helpful NPC along the way that turns out to be the real BBEG. But they bonded with them this entire time, and they've swapped stories around the campfire and stuff. And then they get to, their real bad, their what they think is their real bad, and it turns out to be a misunderstood, socially, awkward person that is just trying to make things work. And then, ha, this person has, taken all their stuff and the corgi. So it's, but it's I like to have something that I can test the barometer of the inner workings of the party with, whether that's introduce something you love or a helpful NPC. Be prepared, though, that they might see through that, especially now that I've put that out there, and might end up killing that NPC. But before then, you will collect some good, it's like a survey. You'll collect some good information of how you can progress further with this party. And to be honest, like as the facilitator for the adventure, it feels fun to have a little bit of you in something that's in there, so you're not all the way on the outside looking in.
I think it's a really important question, and I think Markia's dead on. I don't hide much, and I'm not trying to. I think that when we do our session zeros and we talk about what people's triggers are, and I'm not afraid of them finding out that this is actually going to be about body horror, or like, this isn't, everything's not what it seems, there's a hidden threat. That actually works in your favor. Again, it's like the box on the table. They know it's coming, they just don't know where. If I sat in this room and I said, hey, we're going to listen, to some really good jazz, and it's going to be high energy and fast paced, and you're going to feel it. And then I say, it's Johnny Coltrane. You're not going to have the same reaction to me playing the record, because when you hear it and the music happens, it affects you and you feel it. And then it's a different experience. It's, or like going to a restaurant and seeing what the ingredients on your dish are, and then getting the food and eating the food. It doesn't really, in my mind, distract from the art and the craft of what you've done.
That's a really good analogy to put that way. So with food and, and music and stuff like that, because a lot of people can connect with that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'm going to open it up for questions. If you guys have questions, we have a little bit of time. Otherwise, I do have more questions to ask them. So yeah.
Okay, so what are some tips, or what are your favorite tips to like foreshadow either a big bad is coming or something really bad is about to happen?
Okay, so I'm going to repeat it just so that this can pick it up in case it didn't. The question is that tips for foreshadowing when the big bad is coming or something is coming.
I like to use poetry. I feel like that it already exists out there for you. You might as well utilize that. It's sets such a beautiful tone. You can practice with it ahead of time. And it's something that, depending on how your game is, you can dress it up in calligraphy or print it up and have that in front of each of your players for them to like read along. And there's it's used a lot in novels. Like Stephen King uses it all the time. Whether he's makes it up and says that it's from somebody else, or he actually uses something that someone has done. So, but I think that has worked so many times for me. So I'd recommend that.
The fact that you're thinking about foreshadowing means that you're doing something right automatically. It's part of theme. I think it's like understanding that, hey, this thing is coming. We know that there's a danger. We know that there's a threat. The more that your players know that before they reach it, the more impactful the thing is by the time they get to it. So just even being aware of that is the right path. But when you're dropping hints and things, go back into your theme. Like if this is a villain or an entity that is like does anybody have any teeth issues? Great. So if you're doing something that kind of circles around like a tooth fairy monster that's like ripping things out of people's heads and taking their teeth and collecting them, and that the dead bodies that they're finding have had all their teeth removed. If while they're investigating all this, teeth are discovered in weird places, somebody bites into an apple and there's a tooth inside. Like those sorts of things are going to start to be like, why the hell are there teeth everywhere? And then when you get to the creepy creature that is sitting here with teeth hanging around them in a multitude of like necklaces, oh, okay, that's why we had teeth. Finding those little things and pathways and breadcrumbs that you can sprinkle ahead, going back to your theme, is always going to be a good choice.
All right, any other questions? Yeah.
Do you think Dungeons and Dragons is a good system to run horror?
Okay, so the question is, do you think Dungeons and Dragons is a good system to run horror in? I'm really interested in this one.
I will say that Markia and I were just on a panel at Midsummer Scream, and it was about that, the whole panel.
Yeah. Of course, Ravenloft came up with it, yes. And I think, and you said to start with, or just to run horror in?
Just to because I like with D&D, so a lot of the games is about like the power of being a really strong character, so I'm wondering how that gels with.
Okay, well, I'm gonna Nox you earmuffs. No, just because he's heard this before. I believe horror is about intent. Because for me, horror is life. It is, and it's sprinkled throughout everything that we do. And like, for instance, with D&D, it isn't. I mean, yes, there are zombies and licks and what is it? The crappy dragon. What's the crappy dragon? Wyverns. Wyverns. Wyverns.
Oh, that's target as the Kmart dragon. Yeah.
Oh yeah. My friend Jody Hauser, like the first time we battled one together, she's like, "This is just a crappy dragon." I think she sells merch where she has that on there now. The thing with D&D is that horror is already in so many places. It's not just in the monster manual.
Mm-hmm.
And I said this in our panel, Midsummer Scream. Think about the spell Modify Memory. The very fact that you have someone that if they get to a high enough level, they can erase 24 hours of your life and then restructure it however they want to, and that changes your personality fundamentally. Ultimate gaslighting. I mean, oh my gosh, that's horrific to me. That's horrible. And that has nothing to do with a wisp or with Vecna. That has nothing to do with that. That's baked into the system. So
go ahead.
But yeah, to come back to answering the actual question, yes, you absolutely can. It's about your intent with it. You don't have to have a single zombie in it or a vampire or anything. You can still have a horror campaign because of the things that your players can already do.
I think that was probably your question. I understand. I think that you're talking about like mechanically, does it work and does it fit and all that. And
there's something better. If there would be something better.
Is there something better?
We'll call it.
I mean, I have a slew of games that I am the creative director and help. I will be happy to point you at some better games. But again, this isn't about trashing D&D. And listen, mechanically, D&D has certain elements that are built to do what D&D does. It is big action. You said it yourself. It's a power fantasy. Can you put horror into that? You can put horror into anything. It's all about tone, intent, theme. Everything that we've already talked about, you can put into any game. I probably shouldn't say this, but the system is irrelevant. Your intent and your game and your table, that's what matters. How you tell the story matters. Ravenloft is a great example. I love Ravenloft. I played it for years and years, and it's a horror setting, so it does have certain things that are baked into it. It has certain elements that help you kind of convert D&D into a horror. However, you can do this with anything. The Forgotten Realms and Dragonlance, any of that can be
Tales
horror.
of Equestria.
Yeah, any of it can be done in a way that is horror themed. But I think that more importantly, if you're seeking the right way to kind of go about it and play D&D in that way, if that's really your quest, or if you just want us to say don't play D&D, but if you're looking for the right way to play D&D in that way so that it is pointing towards horror, it's all about those tools that we've talked about here.
My suggestion is actually going to use a tension element. So for instance, play D&D, add a dread tower to it. Mm-hmm. And every time the players have to roll their dice, they also have to take something from the tower out and put it on top. Once that tower tumbles, something happens, but the players never know what that something is. Or you can take something from like Chill, where you have coins, and you have coins for each player and then +1. One side of the coin the players can use to do things, whether it's re-roll, add a success, maybe they forgot something that they need now and it's not in their inventory, and you flip it over. The other side is for the GM to use, for the big bad or whatever is coming up. And it could be thematic elements, it could be something that the monster can use some sort of omen or foreshadowing no matter where they are in the setting. They don't have to be in the next room. They could be across town. And all of a sudden your players are getting omens from this thing. Use some sort of tension element, so add that in. And I would talk with your players before as to what it is that you're supposed to do, because they'll be like, oh, we're playing Jenga. And if you don't tell them what it's for, they're not going to get that tension. They're just like, okay, I'm confused. I don't know what this is for. This is something extra. This is not in the rules. What is this used for? So say, this is used for every time you guys take an action, you have to move one of the pieces. And when that tower falls, something happens. You don't have to tell them what. It could literally be you get an omen.
It's probably better that you don't tell them.
Yeah, it's better if you don't tell them. But it could literally be like, okay, well, the tower fell really early because one of our players really does not play Jenga well. And so you give them an omen instead of having a big fight or something like that. So you can use it in different ways, but it has that visual tension there where the players can get that feeling and build that feeling up.
Can I jump in real quick? I want to say this about specifically Dread and any skill-based mechanic that you might bring to the table. This goes back to knowing your players.
Yep.
If somebody has a mobility impairment, don't bring it to the table.
Yeah. Yes. Make it accessible.
Yeah.
Use the coins instead, or
there's
find
so many other
something
ways to do
else.
it. It's just the idea of the thing. It's
Yep.
not necessarily the thing. You can build tension so many different ways. But just be aware of it, because it's not just the story that you're telling, it's also the tools that you're bringing to the table that might have an effect on someone.
All right. So we have like 4 minutes left. So here's what I'm going to do. We do have to respect the next people that are coming in line. I'm actually going to be outside for a little bit. So if you guys have questions, please feel free to come up. I don't know where you guys need to be. If you guys need to take off.
I'll step out for a while, yeah.
Okay,
And I've got
so-
Brian's card too, so if
Cool.
anybody wants to take a photo.
If you do have tickets for this event, please bring them up here. Just set them on the table. I will get them, and then I will be back out. Thank you guys so much for coming, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.